He was just a kid, running barefoot through the cracked streets of a forgotten city, with nothing in his pockets except hunger and a handful of cheap watches. Every day felt like a fight against time. Not the kind you measure on a clock, but the kind that decides whether you eat tonight or not. He moved fast, always fast, through markets filled with noise, people, chaos. Sometimes he'd stop for a second, not to catch his breath, but to dream. Because somewhere deep down, beyond the dust and the struggle, he believed his story wouldn't end here. He didn't have papers. He didn't have money. He didn't even have a real place to sleep. But he had one thing most people never find: fire. That fire burned every time he saw a basketball hoop. Even the old ones, broken rims, torn nets, they called to him. And he'd answer. He'd grab any ball he could find, or even a rolled-up shirt, and shoot for hours, lost in a world where time didn't matter, where his name might one day mean something. His family was everything. 5 brothers, one dream. They didn't talk about luxury or fame. They talked about surviving, selling watches, sunglasses, anything that could keep them alive for one more week. The streets became their home, their enemy, and their teacher. But the boy never stopped playing. He didn't play for the cheers because there were none. He played for the silence, for the feeling that maybe this was who he was meant to be. At night, he'd sit beside his brothers, counting coins under flickering lights. He'd look up at the stars and whisper to himself, "One day they'll know." But dreams don't grow easily in places built on survival. People laughed, coaches ignored him, scouts passed him by. He was too thin, too raw, too impossible. Yet impossibility was his favorite challenge. He trained harder, he ran farther, he jumped higher. He pushed until his lungs burned and his vision blurred, until pain became his closest friend. Because pain meant progress. Pain meant he was still fighting. Then, one day, something changed. A stranger appeared. A man with eyes that didn't see what the world saw, but what it didn't. He watched the boy play, watched the energy, the speed, the hunger that couldn't be coached or taught. And in that instant, fate took its first step. The man made a call, and the boy got his chance. Leaving was harder than he ever imagined. The streets that had raised him, fed him, hurt him, they were all he knew. But the world was calling, and he had to answer. He arrived in a new country, colder, louder, brighter. The court was different, the players bigger, the expectations massive, but nothing scared him. He'd already survived worse than pressure. Every game was a battle, every loss a lesson, every win a whisper that he was getting closer. And one day that whisper became a roar. Years later, on a night lit by golden lights and the sound of a city holding its breath, the boy, now a man, stood on the biggest stage of his life. Sweat rolled down his face. Every scar, every hunger, every sleepless night. It was all there, in that moment. The final buzzer sounded, and the crowd erupted. He looked up, his eyes filled with tears, not of pride but of gratitude. The kid who once sold watches on the streets had just become a champion. His name? Giannis Antetokounmpo. A name the world would never forget. But what makes his story truly legendary isn't the trophy or the title. It's the journey, the faith he held when there was no reason to, the resilience that turned struggle into strength, the love for family that kept him grounded when the world tried to lift him too high. Giannis didn't chase greatness. He became greatness, one sunrise, one failure, one prayer at a time. And if you listen closely when he steps onto the court, you can still hear the echo of those streets. The sound of dreams being built from dust, the rhythm of a boy who refused to give up. Because true legends aren't made in arenas. They're made in silence, they're made in hunger, they're made when no one's watching. And one boy, with a handful of watches and an unbreakable heart, proved that even when life gives you nothing, you can still build everything. He was born in the shadows of a city that never promised him anything. The streets were loud, the walls covered in faded colors, and the air was thick with the weight of survival. Every morning began the same, the sound of footsteps echoing through narrow alleys, his mother's quiet voice reminding him and his brothers that today, they'd have to try again. No school, no playgrounds, no dreams, just the streets and the watches. He carried them in a small bag, walking for hours through the crowded sidewalks, offering them to strangers who rarely looked twice. The coins he earned weren't much, but they meant food on the table, a roof over their heads, and maybe a day without hunger. Yet, while others saw poverty as a prison, he saw it as training. Every rejection, every moment of being invisible to the world, was a silent lesson, one that built something stronger than hope inside him. Hunger. Not the kind that fades when you eat, but the kind that burns deeper, that makes your hands tremble with desire to become more. He didn't know it yet, but that hunger was his greatest gift. Sometimes, when the streets were quiet, he'd sneak off to an old playground nearby. The basket was bent, the net long gone, the floor cracked and uneven, but to him it was a kingdom. There, for a few stolen moments, the world disappeared. The noise, the struggle, the exhaustion, all gone. It was just him, the ball, and the sound of dreams bouncing off concrete. He didn't have proper shoes, just worn-out sneakers passed down from his brothers. But he didn't care. He ran, he jumped, he fell, and got up again. Every shot was a promise, every miss, a reason to keep going. He'd stay there until the sun disappeared behind the rooftops, pretending the crowd was cheering for him, that the broken hoop was a gateway to somewhere bigger, brighter. Back home, nights were long. The room was small, the walls thin. But what they lacked in space, they made up for in unity. His parents worked until their hands blistered, his brothers shared what little they had, and somehow, laughter still found its way in. Even when there was no electricity, they'd tell stories under candlelight. Stories of heroes, of warriors, of men who turned nothing into something. He never realized it then, but he was already becoming one of them. The days turned into years. He grew taller, stronger, faster. But his reality didn't change. Still no papers, still no certainty, still no place to call home. For most kids, that would have been the end of the story. But for him, it was just the beginning. Because he wasn't chasing comfort. He was chasing purpose. One afternoon, while playing on that same cracked court, someone was watching. A man who didn't care about stats or fame. He cared about heart. He saw how the boy moved, raw, unpolished, but filled with something rare. Determination. Spirit. Light. That man made a call, and the boy's life changed forever. Leaving the only world he knew was terrifying. He didn't speak the language. He didn't understand the culture. But he understood one thing: the grind. He trained harder than anyone. He didn't care if his body ached or if the crowd laughed at his awkward style. For him, every drop of sweat was a step away from the streets that tried to bury him. People doubted him. Said he was too skinny, too quiet, too strange. They didn't see the kid who once sold watches in the cold. They didn't see the boy who had carried his family's future on his back. All they saw was a rookie who didn't fit the mold. But he didn't need their validation. He had already learned how to live without it. Every night he practiced. Every morning he woke up before the sun. He wasn't just training his body. He was training his soul. He didn't want to be good. He wanted to be unstoppable. And he was. Season after season, he rose higher. Every dunk, every block, every step on the court was a reminder of how far he had come. From the narrow streets where dreams were a luxury, to the blinding lights of arenas where millions screamed. The boy who once chased customers through busy streets was now being chased by defenders who couldn't outstop him. The same hands that once held fake watches now held trophies. The same eyes that once searched for buyers now stared down legends. Then came the night that changed everything. The air was heavy, the noise deafening. His team needed him, the city needed him, and the world was watching. When the final buzzer sounded, he fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. The crowd erupted, but he didn't hear them. His mind was back home, back to the streets, back to the boy who refused to give up. And in that moment, he wasn't just a player, he was proof. Proof that no struggle is too heavy, no dream too far, no beginning too small. That boy was Giannis Antetokounmpo. And his story isn't about basketball, it's about faith, about family, about turning pain into power and poverty into purpose. Because greatness doesn't come from privilege. It comes from persistence. He showed the world that it doesn't matter where you start. What matters is how hard you fight to never stop. Even now, when he walks into the arena, you can still see it in his eyes. The fire of that boy who once stood on a broken court, chasing something no one else could see. And every time he lifts his head after a victory, it's as if he's whispering to that younger version of himself, "You did it! You made them know your name." The journey wasn't smooth. It never is for those who start with nothing. The boy who once chased strangers through crowded streets now found himself chasing a dream surrounded by giants. Every gym, every court, every practice session. He was the outsider, the foreigner, the one with the strange name no one could pronounce. He didn't look like the others, didn't move like the others, didn't even dress like them. But that didn't matter to him. Because while they saw a stranger, he saw a purpose. His first months were brutal. He was too thin, too shy, too humble to belong. Reporters called him a project. Coaches whispered words like potential and raw talent, code for not ready yet. The lights were too bright, the crowds too loud, the expectations too heavy. He missed home, the streets, his family, the smell of the food stands, the sound of his brother's laughter. But he couldn't go back. There was nothing to return to except the life he had fought to escape. So he stayed, he worked, he trained when no one was watching. When others left the gym, he stayed behind. His hands blistered, his knees burned, but he refused to stop. He studied the game, every movement, every angle, every mistake. He wasn't the most talented, but he would become the most relentless. Still, doubt followed him everywhere. Every game, someone was waiting for him to fail. Every bad performance brought the same headlines. He's not ready. He'll never make it. He's just a story, not a star. But they didn't know what it meant to come from nothing. They didn't know what it felt like to have your family depend on you. They didn't know the hunger that comes from going to sleep without eating. So he kept going. Slowly something began to change. The awkwardness faded. The hesitation turned into confidence. The shy smile became a look of determination. And the boy who once struggled to fit in began to dominate. He moved like liquid lightning, long strides, fast hands, unstoppable energy. He didn't just play basketball, he attacked it. Every possession was a fight, every rebound, a war. But success didn't come without pain. His body began to ache from the constant grind. His mind was tired. The pressure mounted. Critics said he couldn't lead. Fans turned on him after every loss. He could have quit. No one would have blamed him. But he didn't. Because every time he thought about giving up, he remembered the nights on the cold pavement, selling watches to strangers just to feed his family. That memory became his fuel. He knew he wasn't just playing for himself. He was playing for his parents, who had sacrificed everything to keep the family together. For his brothers, who had shared his pain and his hunger. For the city that had once ignored him, but now carried his name on its back. And then came the moments that broke him and built him again. One season, everything he'd worked for seemed to crumble. Injuries, losses, heartbreak. He questioned everything. He looked in the mirror and saw the same kid he used to be. Scared, uncertain, tired. But then he remembered why he started. He didn't come this far to stop halfway. So he pushed harder. He trained through the pain. He learned to silence the noise. Every game became a statement, not to the critics, but to himself. He learned that true greatness isn't about winning easily, it's about enduring what others can't. And then came the climb. His team began to change, reflecting his hunger. They played with heart, with belief. They weren't the favorites. They didn't have the biggest stars. But they had him, the relentless force who refused to break. Game after game, they rose higher, defying odds, defying expectations, defying logic. The city began to believe. The arenas that were once half empty now thundered with chants of hope. Every dunk, every block, every roar from the crowd felt like redemption. But the higher he climbed, the heavier the weight became. The closer he got to his dream, the more the fear whispered, "What if you fail now? After everything?" He didn't answer with words. He answered with work. In the playoffs, the battles were brutal. Blood, sweat, exhaustion, everything on the line. He gave everything he had, game after game, until his body screamed for rest. But rest wasn't an option. This was his destiny, and he was ready to die for it. There were moments when it seemed impossible, when defeat felt certain, when the scoreboard mocked everything he'd fought for. But each time something inside him ignited, the same spark that had once kept him alive on those dark streets. He remembered selling watches under the hot sun, the sound of coins dropping into his palm, his mother's tired smile when he came home with food. That memory wasn't pain anymore. It was power. And with every second, he grew stronger. The world began to notice. Reporters stopped calling him raw talent and started calling him a force of nature. Teammates followed his lead. Opponents feared him. His name began to echo through arenas, whispered by fans, shouted by children, printed on jerseys across continents. But even then, he stayed humble. He remembered where he came from. He remembered who he was. And deep inside, he knew the story wasn't over yet, because the greatest moment, the one that would define everything, was still coming. It wasn't just another game. It wasn't just another night. It was the moment his entire life had been building toward. The court was bright, the stakes higher than ever. The city held its breath. He stood there, calm but burning inside. Every scar, every tear, every memory, they were all here, in this single moment. And soon, the world would finally learn the name of the boy who refused to fall. The arena was a storm of noise and light. The air felt electric, every cheer, every heartbeat sinking into one collective pulse. It was the night everything had led to. The game that would decide not just a championship, but a destiny. The man who once ran through dusty streets, selling watches to strangers, now stood under the blinding lights of the world's greatest stage. But inside, he felt that same hunger, the one that never left. The hunger that once made him dribble on cracked concrete with no shoes, no future, no reason to believe, except himself. The scoreboard glowed like fire. The game was slipping away. His team was behind, the crowd restless, his teammates exhausted. His body ached, every muscle screaming for mercy. His knee was wrapped tight, his hands swollen from endless battles under the rim. But quitting wasn't part of him. He'd already lived through harder pain, pain that didn't end with a buzzer. He could feel the weight of everything pressing down on him. The years of doubt, the headlines calling him overrated, the whispers that he'd never lead a team to glory. But he wasn't thinking about them. He was thinking about home, about his mother's face, about his brother sleeping in one bed, dreaming of a better tomorrow, about the promise he made to himself when he was just a boy, that one day they would all be proud. The timeout ended. Sweat dripped from his chin like raindrops. He walked to the free throw line, the crowd roaring, the pressure crushing. But he wasn't afraid. He looked up for a moment, closing his eyes. The arena disappeared. All he could see was that broken hoop back home, hanging from a leaning pole, the one he used to shoot at for hours. Back then there was no crowd, no cameras, no trophies, just a dream. And somehow that dream had carried him here. The ball left his hand. Perfect spin, perfect arc. It sank. Then another, then another. His team was alive again. The crowd exploded, a wave of sound crashing over him. But he didn't celebrate. He just nodded, eyes locked, laser-focused, because it wasn't done. The game grew wilder. Opponents attacked with everything they had. Every time he fell, he got back up. Every time he was fouled, he stood taller. He was relentless, a storm in motion, uncontainable. His defense, his energy, his will. They pulled his team forward like a force of nature. The underdog had become the monster they couldn't stop. In those final minutes, the court turned into a battlefield. He drove through defenders like they were shadows, leaping higher, pushing harder, as if gravity itself had given up on holding him down. His opponents could only watch as he turned the impossible into reality. Shot after shot, block after block, a performance that defied logic. The crowd could sense it. Something historic was happening. Even the commentators ran out of words. This wasn't just athleticism, it was destiny in motion. Every move he made seemed guided by something greater, by every sacrifice, every prayer whispered into the night. And then, with the clock ticking down, the moment arrived. His team clung to a narrow lead. The opposing star drove to the basket, desperate. He met him in midair, two titans colliding. The ball hit his hand, flying away like a spark from an explosion. The arena went silent for a heartbeat, then erupted like thunder. It was the block of the decade, the play that sealed history. When the final buzzer echoed, he stood still, frozen in disbelief. His teammates rushed him, the crowd exploded, confetti rained down like fireflies. Cameras flashed. The scoreboard told the story, but the real story was written on his face. Tears streamed down his cheeks, cutting through the sweat and exhaustion. He wasn't just a champion. He was free. He looked up toward the lights, his chest heaving, his heart pounding. For a moment, he wasn't in the arena anymore. He was back in the streets of Athens. Back to that small apartment where his parents counted coins to buy bread. Back to the nights he sold watches, hungry but hopeful. Back to that broken court, where a boy dared to dream when no one else would. The roar of the crowd faded as he whispered a thank you, not to the fans, not to the critics, but to the struggle itself, because without it, he wouldn't be here. Without pain, he'd never have found purpose. Without hunger, he'd never have learned to feast. His teammates lifted him high. Cameras caught his smile. A mix of joy, exhaustion, and disbelief. The trophy gleamed in his hands, heavy but somehow light at the same time. It wasn't just gold and metal. It was proof. Proof that you can start with nothing. No money, no status, no guarantee, and still become everything. The reporters swarmed, shouting his name. The world finally knew who he was. But when they asked him how he did it, he just smiled and said, "I never stopped working. I never stopped believing." Because now the story was complete. The kid who sold watches on the streets was the king of basketball. The boy who once chased strangers for coins was now being chased by cameras, by fans, by history itself. And in that moment, under the lights, surrounded by chaos and celebration, he realized something profound. The dream had never been about fame or trophies. It had been about becoming. Becoming the man his younger self always wanted to see. That night, the streets of Athens didn't sleep. People danced, shouted, cried, because one of their own had defied the odds. One of their sons had reached the stars. And as he held that trophy close, eyes filled with tears, the boy who once had nothing finally understood what it meant to have everything. His name was Giannis Antetokounmpo. The arena was empty now. The confetti had settled, the cameras were gone, and the echoes of victory faded into the quiet hum of distant lights. He sat alone on the bench, the championship trophy resting beside him, its golden surface catching the dim reflections of the ceiling lights. For the first time in years there was silence. Not the silence of hunger, not the silence of struggle, but the silence of peace. He exhaled, eyes closed, feeling the weight of everything that had led to this moment. He wasn't thinking about the cameras or the headlines that would come tomorrow. He wasn't thinking about MVP awards or legacy or fame. He was thinking about that little boy. The one who used to run barefoot down the streets, clutching a handful of watches, chasing a dream no one could see but him. The one who kept playing, even when no one was watching. He smiled, because that boy hadn't disappeared. He was still there, hidden beneath the muscles, the fame, the spotlight. The same kid who played for love, not applause. The same kid who knew that the most beautiful victories are the ones no one believes you can win. He stood and walked slowly across the court. Every step echoed like a memory, a reminder of every place he'd come from, every person who had helped him, every obstacle that had tried to stop him. The floor beneath his feet was polished and perfect, but he remembered the uneven concrete of the old playgrounds back home. He remembered the sting of failure, the burn of rejection, the laughter of those who doubted. And he realized, all of it had been necessary. Every wound, every scar, every tear. They weren't signs of weakness. They were the proof that he had lived, that he had fought, that he had earned every second of this peace. The world saw him as a champion, but he knew better. He wasn't a product of talent alone. He was the result of pain transformed into purpose, fear turned into fire, and love turned into legacy. He thought about his parents, the endless sacrifices, the nights they went without so he could have something, anything. He thought about his brothers, who ran beside him through the same struggles, who shared the same dreams and the same hunger. He thought about the strangers who once ignored him on the streets, who never looked him in the eye. They didn't see it then. But every rejection, every closed door, had pushed him closer to this moment. He picked up the trophy, looked at it for a long time, and whispered a prayer. Not for more success, but for gratitude. Because he finally understood. True greatness isn't about how far you rise. It's about how much you give, how much you endure, and how much you stay true to who you are when the world tries to change you. He knew that someday, another kid somewhere, maybe on another continent, maybe on another cracked court, would hear his story. Maybe that kid would be selling something too. Maybe that kid would think dreams were impossible. And maybe, just maybe, this story would make them believe that impossible doesn't mean unreachable. Because that's the real gift of struggle. It doesn't just shape you. It inspires others to rise. He walked to the center of the court, the lights dimming around him. The stadium was empty, but it didn't feel lonely. It felt sacred. This was where pain had turned into power, where doubt had turned into destiny, where a boy from nowhere became a man who belonged everywhere. He touched the floor one last time before leaving, almost like saying goodbye to an old friend, because in a way the journey had come full circle. The boy who once sold watches had finally learned the value of time. Every second, every hardship, every step of the climb, it had all been worth it. He didn't need the cheers anymore. He didn't need the validation. The victory wasn't the championship, it was the transformation. The evolution from a boy fighting for survival to a man fighting for purpose. That's what made him different. That's what made him legendary. And as he walked into the tunnel, the echoes of the crowd long gone, he smiled one last time, because he knew something the world often forgets. You don't have to be born with greatness to achieve it. You build it, piece by piece, through pain, patience, and persistence. His story wasn't about basketball. It was about life. About how far belief can take you when the world gives you nothing. About the beauty of never giving up, even when the odds say you should. About the truth that no matter where you start, whether it is a mansion or a market, a palace or a pavement, what defines you isn't your circumstances. It's your heart. Giannis Antetokounmpo's story will be told for generations, not just because he won, but because he showed us what winning really means. It means refusing to surrender when everything tells you to stop. It means holding on to faith when there's nothing left to hold. It means turning your pain into power until the whole world has no choice but to see you. The moral of his story is simple, but eternal. You are not your past. You are your persistence. And for the boy who came from the streets with nothing but a dream, that persistence made him a legend. Because legends are born from hunger, shaped by struggle, and crowned by faith.